To help us get a better understanding of the function of a criterion of morality or fundamental principle of morality within moral theory, let's consider a couple of examples of fundamental principles of morality or criteria of morality. And we're going to talk about ones for theories that we're not going to be discussing in this set of lectures. That is, let's talk about a form of moral theory known as egoism. And egoism is also, like Mill's theory, a version of consequentialism, in that what makes actions right or wrong according to that theory are the consequences. And it's also a version of hedonism, in that pain or pleasure and pain, hedonism, pleasure and pain are the deciding factors of what makes consequences good or bad. And egoism, as you can tell from the name, is based on the idea that the pain and pleasure of the consequences, or the only one for whom the pain and pleasure of the consequences count in deciding if an action is right or wrong, is the person himself, me or you. Now, we would summarize this theory as the following criterion of morality. Excuse me. Action A, certain action is right if and only if that action A results in the greatest balance of pleasure and pain for me. We see this is a version of relativism that we talked about earlier on in the course. But the one thing to notice then is just that it tells us the conditions under which actions are right. That is, it's necessary for an action to be right that it results in the greatest balance of pleasure and pain for me. And it tells us that it's sufficient, it's enough that an action results in the greatest balance of pleasure and pain of the alternatives for me, that action be right. So let's consider an example how we would apply this, because it's going to kind of become important later on when we look at evaluating these theories. That is how you apply the principle. Now, assume I'm a sadist. I'm giving you these really boring lectures. Why? Not because I can't give very interesting lectures, but why I've decided to torture you. And I give you this boring work, some really boring work that you can very easily do, but it takes you a long time. It's really boring. It's really tedious kind of work. And I also give you other kind of work that it's absolutely impossible for you to be able to do. So, and then I give you tests that are really very difficult, and after all this I fail you. So let's talk about my teaching the course in this way. Is my teaching the course this way, an action on my part, right or wrong according to this theory? Well, it sounds like that, if it's right, then my teaching this course results in the greatest balance of pleasure and pain for me of all the alternatives that I could do. And, okay, in this case, it looks like that condition is met. That is, I'm happy as a lark, very happy to be able to torture you through this course. Remember, I'm the only one that counts, at least for what makes the action right or right for me in this case. And notice, it's good enough to say, according to the theory, since that condition is met, it's sufficient for that action's being right. So in trying to figure out if theories are good, the way we're going to test them is we're going to test them through thought experiments. In science, we test theories by carrying out experiments, actually doing things. When it comes to ethical theories, we're going to have to resort to thinking about things, thought experiments, since the results of an actual experiment out in the world isn't going to tell us anything about morality. Let's consider another theory, cultural relativism. We talked about this earlier when we briefly talked about relativism, but say, according to this theory, an action's right if and only if the action is believed to be right or deemed to be right by the members of a certain culture or society. Okay, now in deciding whether a certain action, let's say burying somebody in a certain, or burying somebody versus um, versus cremation. So somebody dies, we're going to bury somebody. Is that the right thing to do? Well, according to this theory, captured in that criterion of morality, if the action is right, then it's got to be believed by to be right, or deemed to be right by the members of a specific culture or society. So imagine we have a group of people that think it's absolutely the worst thing in the world, or the most disrespectful thing that you could do, to burn a person's body after death. Um, in that case, and burying is really the proper way to to give the person or the person's corpse the dignity it deserves. In that case, we see that according to the criterion of morality, well, it's believed by the members of this particular society that we're talking about that burial is the preferred method of disposing or putting the person's corpse in its final resting place. So, and that's sufficient according to this principle to make the action right. Okay, so that's how we apply. And remember, when we apply principles of morality, don't go by the name egoism, don't go by cultural relativism, or the name of any theory that we're talking about. What we want to do is look at the criterion of morality that we formulated and test that against our intuitions, our understanding of actions that are clearly right and wrong, and test it against them to see if these principles are adequate.